My goodness, that is an impressive aggregation of talent. And I see the wise ones are sitting over here where the shade is, and the somewhat less than wise are on the right. And you'll notice I'm on this side and Frank's on that side. I have the great privilege of introducing the individual who has traveled farthest to get here. He came from Los Angeles to Tucson, to Atlanta, to Washington, to Istanbul or someplace. He's been traveling for, what, 4 days? No, 2 days, better part. How many of you have met Frank and have attended one of his sessions in Washington? Look at that. Good. Okay, well then you know what we're up to here. He is a, I'm not going to read this, but I have to read one quote. Somebody, it was a Brit, Sir David Frost, called Frank the Nostradamus of pollsters. Now, I think that's a British flight of fancy myself, but it's an example. Frank got his PhD at the age of 25 from Oxford. How old were you, Fred?
I was 14.
All right. But Frank is a very wise, seasoned, experienced, current talent. And he's been called so many things. One of the top research minds by Business Week. He's been given the coveted Crystal Ball Award for being the most accurate pundit. He is an advisor to something like 50 of the Fortune 500 chief executives officers. He has done and is doing an enormous number of things that reflect the reality that he is unique. He's distinctive. He does things that most people don't do. He forecasts, he predicts, he commentates, and besides that, he's got a pattern where I invited him to speak to several groups of fellows. Normally, when some talented person comes and meets with the fellows ask them questions. They ask the person who's there to meet with them. Frank doesn't answer a single question. He spent the whole time asking you folks the questions. And he turns the table. So this is supposed to be a conversation with Donald Rumsfeld and Frank Luntz. I think it's going to be a conversation with Frank Luntz because he is current, he has come a long way, and it's important that we hear what he has to say. If you have any political questions, ask Frank, not me. Do you want to say anything to start this thing?
No, I want to know, are you done?
I was going to look at you and take your temperature to make sure that everything was all right. But all right, I'm done.
So you have to, from my perspective, there is no way that I would ever turn you down. And I'm going to give him a hard time. I promise you, because that's just what I do. But I need to preface it that I really believe that we are lucky to be here. In the meetings that I've had with those of you, either here in the conversations that I've had, or with the 2 years, you guys are remarkable. And I feel blessed to know you, and I feel that it was a special thing for you to have invited me to participate because I would never have heard your perspectives. I would have never have learned as much. The time that I spend with you is remarkable. And some of you give me hell every time I'm with you, and I appreciate it. And I encourage you, I'm actually ask you, as we're going through the tour and tonight at dinner, whatever you want Americans to know, please tell me, because I promise you that I will communicate it. And the fact that you've created this organization of people who haven't been to each other's countries, did not know what was going on, and now you've got these relationships that last beyond the next 24 hours. is something incredible. And I applaud you. I know that some of you will someday head your countries. You'll be very important in the economy and culture. This is a very special organization, and Secretary Rumsfeld, you're an incredible person to have put this together, and we are all grateful. Okay, you're a little slow there. And I'm going to ask you all one question first, and then I'm going to turn it to you, and you're going to answer the same question. If the election were held today, and you all were Americans, God help you.
It's a secret ballot. You don't have to answer them.
Yes, you do. If the election were held today, and it's Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, and you had to choose, who would vote for Hillary Clinton? Raise your hands. Okay. And who would vote for Donald Trump? Wow. There are actually 3 people who would. Do we have an extra microphone?
Who would not vote?
Okay, I want the 3 people who voted for Trump. I want the 3 people who would vote for Trump stand up, and if you will run your microphone to them, because I want to know why. And by the way, you have incredible courage, and I will tell Trump, and he will pay you $1 million for this. Why Trump?
I think it's not my choice. Whatever happens in favor of him, and I think he will win. And it's not like I want that. I think it will happen in this way.
So you just think he will win?
Yeah.
So what, do you hate America?
No. I don't think he's a bad guy, but he's direct. He's something new for the whole world, and people will try him, and just for the curiosity to understand what he will do, because the rest are too process-oriented, and he's too target-oriented. I think that's his main benefit.
There's another Trump person here. Someone else raised their hand, a little bit further back.
Never before American elections has been so decisive for the whole world in any period before. But if we, as an academician, I do believe that history actually has the characteristic or feature of being repeated. And if we look back into American politics, I would recall Ronald Reagan's elections when he's an actor also, would be probably that controversial as Trump today. So there is a potential for Trump as a businessman to take a lead, and of course he has some very aggressive rhetorics today, but probably it's just a populism which is done. But I think he has more potential to bring a real change to the economy of the world.
But I need to correct you on one thing. If Hillary Clinton is elected president, she will not be our first female president. Jimmy Carter was our first female president.
The one thing I forgot to caution you on is that sometimes Frank goes over the line. And you don't have to laugh at him because it just encourages him. Really.
Yeah, and by the way, you all may not know this. We got one more Trump person in the back. I want one more person to get the microphone. But I just want to also, Donald Trump has been married 3 times. All 3 of Trump's wives are immigrants, which is proof that there are some jobs only an immigrant will do. Why Donald Trump?
You don't have to laugh at him.
Stop making it difficult.
Yeah, why not?
Why not? I'm going to answer that question in a minute when everyone turns their microphones off.
He's popular. He's different in terms of all this political elite available in the United States. He's something like distinguished, something that tells differently. Even though we consider most of his rhetoric something messy or really kind of aggressive. But what is the difference between Trump and other leaders who can speak smoothly, being really eloquent, but with no result? What makes America different? And I think that I don't support Trump really 100%. I would rather not to vote, but I think the case could be the same as with Ronald Reagan. she was right. I get him that, all the people were considering him as a crazy guy. Although he had some kind of, track record of being a governor or kind of some political experience, but everybody considered him as a crazy guy when he said that evil, like world evil, is Soviet Union, and this is the enemy we need to, kind of eliminate. And this is why, he could be decisive in some measures that other politicians won't do.
I think the comment where you raise the Reagan question is important and valid. My entire adult life, almost every Republican candidate has been dismissed as being not very smart or not very competent or bad in one way or another. If you go back to Dwight Eisenhower, the press characterized him as not being very smart. He had poor syntax and what have you. Gerald Ford was undoubtedly one of the best athletes that's ever served in the White House, and the press characterized him as a stumble bum. And Republican Ronald Reagan, they laughed at until they Anderson found his diary and read what he'd actually written himself. But there is a pattern, a long pattern in the United States of Republican, I don't want to get partisan, but it's just a reality that Republican candidates are characterized by the media as something other than they prove to be.
There's one more, and he's in the back. There's one more Trump person. And I particularly want to recognize him because he gave me more crap than anybody else a year and a half ago. So now you're saying you're voting for Donald Trump. You really must not like America.
I love all the people in the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bernie Sanders, right there.
I like him too, actually. I think he's a businessman, and as a result, he says what he thinks, compared to Hillary. I mean, look at her. So the thing is, businessmen are those who can change the lives of many people because they change themselves first. And what he says, the Americans must be getting wrong about him. That's it.
When I think about what Trump says, he made comments about NATO that were characterized in the media as indicating he wanted to pull out of NATO or abolish NATO or what have you. And various press people have, abbreviated and changed somewhat. So I had someone in my office recently do the research and find out precisely what he said. And interestingly, the gravamen, there are two things of what he said. One was that NATO was out of date, in effect. And the other was that the European countries are not pulling their weight in terms of investments. It's interesting that I sent a memo to President Bush back in 2002 or 3 saying essentially the same thing, that the NATO and the UN and all these major institutions, the CIA, the Department of Defense, National Security Council, were all created in the Truman administration at the end of World War II when you were going into the Cold War. And they've served the world and the country pretty well. But this, as you move into the information age and into the 21st century, all of those institutions need some attention. And they've not received the kind of thoughtful adjustments and changes that would help, for in the case of NATO, help NATO really serve the member countries better. Second, with respect to the investment, the United States Department of Defense spends about just under 4% of our gross domestic product on defense. Our NATO allies are spending less than 2% on defense of their gross domestic. Now, that is just a fact, that they are underperforming in terms of their investment. Now, the difference is, Donald Trump says what he says in a very colorful, gripping way, and he gets 25,000 people to come hear him speak, just like Bernie Sanders says what he says in a gripping way and gets 25,000. When I say what I just said, people's eyes glaze over and they go to sleep. But the difference between what I just said and what Trump said on NATO, there isn't that much difference.
Okay, so here's my question for you. In my conversations, there are a significant percentage, more than half, I'd say, in this area, that are nervous about Vladimir Putin and his intentions for this region and for the other neighbors and even the Middle East. In dealing with Putin, whom do you trust more? Hillary Clinton. I'm not asking who you're voting for. Who would you rather negotiate with Putin, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton?
First of all, people ought to be attentive to what Putin's going to do next, and particularly people in this part of the world. Someone asked me one day, what will Putin do next? And I said, whatever he can, whatever it looks to him like he'll be able to get away with. You know, in life, you reward what you want more of and you penalize what you want less of. And his actions thus far have not been penalized. So he'll look around and figure out what he can do next. Personally, I would, on that issue, I don't find Mrs. Clinton's record to be anything that's admirable. The reset button with Russia was unimpressive. And her record as Secretary of State, now I'm a Republican to be sure, but I don't see that she would bring anything to that would be other than another 4 years of like we've had in the last 8 years. And the Minister of Defense who spoke to this group, someone asked her a question. They said, well, what advice would you give if you had a position to give advice to the United States? And she said, act like a superpower. And I don't have any reason to believe that Mrs. Clinton would.
Again, I'm going to ask you guys a question, then I'm going to throw it to you. Barack Obama, in terms of foreign policy, has he been a success or a failure? Barack Obama. Who believes he's been a success? Raise your hands. And who believes he's been a failure? Raise your hands. Why did he get it? And I'm on the side, I acknowledge, I'm on the side of failure. He came in with such promise, and he had the world community eating out of his hand. If you remember, when he was in Britain, Prince Philip could not get enough of him. And the royal family, and it was just this trip across the globe, and everybody, thousands and thousands of people showing up. He could have done anything. Why did it go wrong?
Well, I'm so out of date and out of touch with politics, but I think an awful lot of people in our country were thrilled that the United States had passed and through that barrier and had its first black president of the United States. That was something that I think people in both political parties of all races were grateful that our country had taken that move. I think as an individual, he seems to want to apologize for America rather than recognize that an awful lot of people in the world don't feel the United States should apologize. We're not perfect, but they want the United States to stand tall and to be proud of its values and to encourage other countries and to behave in a way that does not create a vacuum of leadership. And I think the failure largely has been, if you create a vacuum, the vacuum gets filled, and it gets filled by people and countries that don't have our values and don't have our interests, and the result is harmful. My wife, Joyce, who so many of you have asked about, before the last election when President Obama was running, she said if he loses, he will go down in history as the first black president of the United States, and it will be a historic, wonderful thing for our country. And if he wins re-election, he'll go down as the worst president in the history of our country.
So you think he's worse than Jimmy Carter?
I think it's close. I think the weakness is of a kind.
By the way, just for the record, The secretary doesn't tell you this, but he actually has a Run, Barack, Run bumper sticker.
No,
He just puts it on his front bumper.
no.
So and you've worked for a number of presidents. As you reflect, and you are proud of your years on this planet, as you reflect on, let's say, the last 50 or 60 years, which is the one that did the most good in terms of foreign policy and national security?
Well, I think Richard Nixon would be the one who came in, was strategic in his thinking, brought people into his administration who were brilliant, and he had a real eye for talent. And I mean, you think of the people he brought in there, Henry Kissinger and Pat Moynihan, and people give Kissinger an awful lot of credit, and goodness knows he deserves it, but Richard Nixon was the strategist. And he had written, before he ever was elected president in 1968, he'd written about opening to China, for example. And I think that Gerald Ford went into the presidency having the only person in history not having been elected president or vice president in a time of real crisis in the country, and performed well by helping to refill the reservoir of trust in our country, and deserves a lot of credit, but it's a different kind of credit.
So if you were Secretary of Defense, which you will not be, but if you were in the next administration, in the first 24 hours, in terms of either foreign policy or national security, or even in the President's address to the country on January 20th, 2017, what would be the very first thing that you would want the next president to do?
I don't know how to put it in words, but what he would have to accomplish, and he's not...
He. According to...
Do you want me to answer the question? I said he.
He said he. I just want to point that out to you. Are you suggesting that Hillary... Well, anyway, go ahead.
I'm not going to be as judgmental as you have been. I think that what really has to be done is the past period of years has led our friends to be concerned about us as a country, and to question the strength of our friendship. And I think it has led our enemies and people who don't wish us well and who have fundamentally different views as to how the world should be ordered to be emboldened. The problem we've got is we all watch television and we listen to the radio and read the newspapers, and what we see is action. If it bleeds, it leads. If China goes into the South China Sea and builds an airfield and a port on a reef, we read about it and see a picture of it. What you don't read about, or see anything about, or hear anything about, is the absence of any reaction to that. And the same thing's true of Putin going into Crimea, or the same thing's true of the problems we've had in a couple of our cities, in Baltimore or St. Louis. What happens is, when I was a kid, we used to play with magnets and magnetic particles. And if you move the magnet, the particles will either go this way or they'll be repelled, and they'll go that way. And that's happening all across the globe. A parliamentarian in the Philippines sees what's happening in the South China Sea, and he's got a vote coming up. And what does he do? He wets his finger, sees which way the wind's blowing, says, oh boy, I think maybe on this vote coming up I'll tilt towards the PRC and not towards Japan or the Republic of Korea or the United States. Or in Baltimore, where you have these riots going on, and policemen being killed, and no governing body providing support to the police. You just got to know. Some wife goes down, sits down next to a policeman and says, hey, sweetheart, you've been doing this for 12 years. You're not getting any support from the mayor. You're not getting any support from the county commissioners. Don't you think you ought to move to Phoenix and maybe take a different job and go into corporate security? all across the globe, the magnetic particles are turning away. And you cannot create the kind of leadership vacuum that's been created and not have all of those things happen. Someone says, well, what's the gravest threat facing the world? And I would suggest it is that vacuum and the fact that the weight of all of those individual acts that people make are bigger, more important, have greater weight than the big things we read about on television. Because people are making those decisions all across the globe, and they're decisions that are not helpful.
So I'm going to go to you all in about 5 minutes for questions. Then what about this region? What about CAMCA? If there was one thing for you to advise them on what needs to happen here in the next 12 months, what would that be?
Well, I would think the first thing, I think, not at the meeting when the phrase CAMCA was developed. And you folks figured it out and decided it. And I don't, to my knowledge, know anybody who's taken a license on the domain name of CAMCA. I don't know anybody who's gotten an international trademark or label that protects it. And it seems to me that there's been an awful lot of talk about it. And it has the advantage of creating some sense of region, which adds heft and weight to each of the 10 countries involved. And it strikes me that maybe that's something that one of you ought to think about. And you better hurry, because I worry that Zal or Frank or one of Jim Woolsey, these guys will go out and get the domain name and then try to sell it to us.
So who's been, in your mind, who's been the best American president when it comes to foreign policy? Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, or Barack Obama? Who says Ronald Reagan? Raise your hands. George Herbert Walker Bush? No one remembers him. Bill Clinton? George W. Bush? Oh, Mrs. Bush, how are you? And Barack Obama. So Reagan wins, even among this group.
And he was. Reagan had the advantage of being a macro leader. He thought big thoughts, and he was directional. And he'd plant a standard way down the road and say, that's where we're going. And then he'd hire people and bring them into the administration. And if they started getting off the path, he'd tap them on the shoulder and say, let's get back over, that's where we're going. Jimmy Carter did just the opposite. He was much more knowledgeable and micro in terms of little bitty pieces of policy, but nowhere near the strategic approach of a Ronald Reagan, or a Richard Nixon, I should say.
So allow me briefly to explain the election, and then you guys will ask questions for the remaining time. It's very difficult to, as a Republican, to explain Donald Trump. He would not know where your countries are. He would not know how to spell your country's names. He would not want to learn. In the 2 hours before I stood here, before I'm sitting here, I went and did my research so I'd be able to answer questions from you. On the flight over here, I was lucky that I had Wi-Fi. And I spent 3 or 4 hours getting up to date. I don't know that Trump spends 3 or 4 minutes. And it's a problem, it's a challenge, because what is happening all across the globe is significant and serious, and it matters. And then I look at Hillary Clinton. And frankly, I don't believe anything that she says, and there's no reason for me to, based on her record. She hasn't been honest with the American people. Her server, she kept her server at home. The joke in America is that Bill Clinton kept his server at Hooters. I did not know if that joke would translate or not.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that so many knew what Hooters was.
I saw you guys were there last night, so.
Is there one?
There's one, yeah, there's one here. It's called a bar down the street. We surveyed 1,000 women, and we asked them, would you have relations with Bill Clinton if you could? 21% said never again.
Don't laugh at him. It just encourages him. I told you he goes over the line. We just have to be stony silent when he says something that lacks appropriate sensitivity.
If you knew me, you knew that I haven't even come close to the line, and I've got a lot further to go. I can't believe that these are our two nominees. And in the brief time that I've had the chance to listen to you, and in the day and a half that I've been here, even those that don't like what America's doing still want America present and America engaged. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Who do you think is a greater promoter of peace, the United States or Russia? Who here says United States? Raise your hands. I know you're laughing. Who says Russia? I was going to shoot whoever raised their hand for Russia, so. And we expect our candidates to know these things, and Hillary Clinton absolutely knows them.
You're really hung up on this election, aren't you?
I am miserable.
He's a pollster.
And when I try to talk to
He's a pundit.
and people do what he's doing to me right now, they interrupt me in this election. There's no civility, there's no respect, there's no decency. And all of America is like the sky right now. Everyone's gray. And I've never seen a population so angry in its life. And that's
Well, let me say something about that. If there's anything that people ought to take note of, it's that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders can, using social media to be sure, so it's a different era today, but they can announce they want to give a speech somewhere, and they can get 20 or 25 or 30,000 human beings to turn off their television, get in a car, drive to the meeting, and listen to them. I mean, that is a breathtaking number of people. In our country, politicians are lucky to get 400, 500, 600 people to come out and listen to them. And occasionally at a big convention center, they're there because there's lots of speakers and they're there not to hear a single person speak. But we're tone deaf if we don't understand that the American people are responding to Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, and they are saying something, or they're saying whatever they're saying in a way that gets the attention of the American people. And the American people, in a democracy, have something to say about it, not pundits.
Bernie Sanders is so old it takes him an hour and a half to watch 60 Minutes. His favorite painting is The Last Supper. Look carefully, he's the second waiter from the left. The guy is so old, the only time he doesn't have to pee is when he's peeing.
He's more than a decade younger than I am. And that's not that old. Come on, Frank.
It's old.
You know, if we're not careful, people are going to say you don't have enough sense to get in out of the rain.
I know, but you know what? It's actually comfortable because it's hot out here, and I'm not even dressed like you all are. It's a Sunday. It's not a vacation, but you guys, you got jackets and ties and professional, and I realize it's, I mean, I know who you are. But still, I mean, come on, lighten up a little bit. What bothers me the most about this election is what's happening with the young people in the States. And that is that they would watch the Republican debates and they were taking some of Trump's language and then taking it into school the next day. They would use the same insults. They would speak to their teachers in a rude manner. They would make up names about other kids in the class. And this is not the way politics should be. I know, and by the way, Trump yelled at me. Trump called me on national television. He said I was a clown, and I guess it's because of the shoes and the socks and the shirt. And he said I was a slob, which I get, but he also said I was an idiot, which I hope I'm not.
He got his PhD at the age of 25. Now, how can if even Trump knows you're not stupid?
I got better grades than Trump did at the same university. So, but the problem is that we can no longer have these conversations. So I'm watching you all last night at dinner, and it was much better when you weren't talking to people from your countries. And this is something that I really, really always urge you to do. When you come here, you know plenty of people who come from your country. Don't talk to them. Talk to people who are 2 countries away. Talk to people that you never get a chance to see. We're not doing that in America anymore. There is no conversation. There is no dialogue. It's just yelling. And that, for me, is something that I do not understand and do not accept.
The thing that worries me about the election is quite different. The thing that really worries me is that the fact that Bernie Sanders gets 25,000 people to come suggests we're not teaching economics in high school or college in America. We must not be. I mean, nobody can go out and be persuasive, as he is, saying that it's all going to be free. I mean, life just isn't like that it all can be free. It can't be free.
We created a drinking game. My company created a drinking game. In the debates, every time that Bernie Sanders would offer to give away something for free, you had to drink from somebody else's beer. Okay, that's actually a really good joke, but I'll let you think about that. So what can we answer for you? Either on American elections, American national security, you're up first, and then we're going to go to the back.
But not the election. He's covered that excessively.
Thank you very much. I'm very much enjoying the conversation today. You've already started to talk about the youth participation in politics in America. CAMCA, the Rumsfeld Fellowship Program, is about, I guess, encouraging young people to be active in their countries, and we have deputy ministers, we have candidates for parliaments running. But in the US, the presidential elections are showing that the candidates are becoming older and older. So what do you think is the reason for less participation of youth?
Well, I want to make a point that the moment that we started to talk about Trump, it started to rain. Even God is having issues with Trump right now. The average age of the 2 presidential candidates, they're so old, the average age is deceased. Between the 2 of them, they're 70 years, they're 70. That no matter who wins, they will be older. I believe that Hillary's a few months older than Ronald Reagan when Reagan was running. So they will be the oldest pair of candidates. And if Trump chooses Newt Gingrich to be his vice president, then that'll be the oldest ticket in the history of American politics.
Who do you think the Trump or Hillary will pick for vice president?
It doesn't really matter who Hillary picks, because they're going to vote for her based on her own record. For Trump, it does matter because of the concern over whether he has experience. So he needs to choose someone who really understands the way Congress works. If I had to choose one person as a guess, and it's someone you all may not know, but he's chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, it would be Bob Corker of Tennessee. He brings no votes to the ticket, but he is well respected in Washington. The best person you could choose is John Kasich, who's the governor of Ohio, because a Republican cannot win without winning Ohio. The problem is Kasich has been ruder about Trump than I have, and I can't imagine. And the other thing is that Donald Trump doesn't play well with other men. He may say rough stuff about women, but this guy has to be the top dog. Did you guys see Chris Christie? I don't know if that video was over here. I mean, Christie's a big guy. I was quoted in the New York Times as saying Chris Christie should run. I didn't mean run for president, just run. The guy, he turned 40.
Who invited this guy?
He turned 46. This is a true story. And they gave him a birthday cake. He blew out all of his candles. Some staffer asked him, "Governor, what'd you wish for?" "Another birthday cake." And Trump treated him so badly that he would be best off if he chose a woman. But I don't think that he will do so. And as far as Hillary Clinton, I'm thinking Tim Kaine, who's the senator from Virginia, Sherrod Brown, who's the senator from Ohio. But I got to tell you, I don't know how many of you are watching or know who Elizabeth Warren is, but I think there's a possibility there that she would choose 2 women on the ticket to make the case that this really is change, that it is transformational. Next question. We're going to go in the back this time and on this side. So whoever you want to give it to.
Thank you. CAMCA Kudava, a diplomat. My question would be continuation of a very short remark Secretary made about Trump's possible policy regarding NATO, etc. Let's imagine that he's the president tomorrow. What's going to happen with Europe, with NATO ties, with Japan, Korea? He talks so much. And of course, what happens most importantly for us with Putin, with his remarks, with his jokes about nukes, and how we may survive in that environment, this CAMCA region. Thank you.
Well, I've never met Trump, and I don't know how to answer your question. My guess is that his policy with respect to NATO and Japan and the Republic of Korea, where we have very strong involvement and alliances, that those alliances would remain largely like they are, except that he, as he indicated, would very likely go in and do what I suggested to President Bush, that we go into NATO and to our other allies and encourage them to step up to a higher percentage of GDP for defense. And if we're just below 4% and they're below 2%, they darn well, they're successful countries, they have strong economies, and there isn't any reason that I think he's exactly right, that there isn't any reason those countries can't step up and commit a somewhat larger portion of their GDP to defense. And NATO needs it, and our alliances in the Pacific need it. That's my guess.
I'm going to give you credit because you got your hand up with the red thing, and that was a very smart thing to do. For those of you who want to know how to get called on, don't just raise your hand. Actually put something in it like a gun, or in his case, a red notebook, and people will notice it.
Well, it wasn't obviously a red card. I thoroughly enjoy your conversation. Here's my question. Most Americans I know are going to vote for the lesser of the two evils this fall, and not necessarily for the representative of their own party. So this to me indicates a crisis. Is it? And what kind of crisis is it in America? Because the fact is that neither of the two parties have been able to produce a candidate that was able to unite their own traditional voters, let alone be a convincing future leader for the United States. So where are we? What's happening?
I think one thing that's not been mentioned, and I didn't know we were going to turn this into a discussion of the presidential election in the United States, but one thing that's relevant is I've spent a lot of my life dealing with classified material. And you start out with for official use or sensitive or secret, confidential, secret, top secret, and then you go through and create compartments and isolate everybody from getting into those compartments unless they have a need to know. It's called special compartmented information, SCI information. And Zal's dealt with this, and others here have. The reality is that we spend many billions of dollars collecting intelligence. To the extent people are cavalier with the use of classified material, several things happen. First, people learn what we have gathered by way of intelligence. And when you know what intelligence we've got, they then know how to close off that avenue of gathering intelligence, which negates the billions of dollars we're spending to collect intelligence information to help protect the security of the American people and our friends and allies around the world. Second, when people know what intelligence we have, and when you're cavalier with a server for emails and include, as they've said, special compartmented information, it puts our people's lives in danger. Third, it puts the people who are giving us that information, their lives in danger. And fourth, any country has to share intelligence with other countries. We get a lot of our intelligence by our cooperative relationships with many nations around the world. What nation in the world is going to want to share their intelligence with us if we have a Secretary of State who is handling classified at every level and special compartmented information that is only given on a need to know? Even though you're cleared for top secret, you can't know that unless you have a need to know it. Now, what country in the world is going to want to share intelligence with us if they know that's how we manage our affairs? And for her to, I mean, I have no doubt in my mind that if she were a yeoman in the Navy or a sergeant in the Army and did what she has done, and that a yeoman or a sergeant would be in jail. So it seems to me it's unwritten who will be the Democratic nominee. It may very well be that you'll end up in the coming months with someone else being fleeted in for that position in the Democratic convention, if in fact the FBI and the security people in the United States continue to pursue the matter. The thing that's stunning to me is that you have a party picking a person who it is well known has in a major way mismanaged the handling of classified information. I just think it's stunning. The second thing for me that's stunning about the election...
So if she offers you the vice presidential nomination, you won't take it? Is that what you're saying?
I think that is humorous, and I'm glad no one laughed. I think that she could end up having to withdraw, to be perfectly honest, and I don't know that. I don't know anything about it. I'm a law school dropout, so it's not for me to say what the FBI is going to do. But I can't help but believe that there are a lot of people in the security services who will pursue it, and if it isn't handled properly, I would guess you'd see some people resigning from the FBI or from the Department of Justice.
It's not going to happen. She's not going to get indicted because this administration is so political, so partisan, and if she were indicted, then it means that every one of his emails and that whole administration gets sucked into it for the remaining 5 or 6 months, and it will not happen.
The thing that stuns me about the election is that both candidates have such high unfavorables, and that particularly Mrs. Clinton has such high untrustworthy. If there's one thing we need in our political leadership, it's people that you feel you can trust. And the absence of trust, I mean, we don't lead by commanding people in democracies, we lead by consent. And you don't earn consent unless people have a modicum of respect and conviction that what you're saying is true. If you need their consent, you have to be believable, and you have to have people leaning forward and willing to consider that you're not unfavorable, to use the political term. And in both these cases, both of these candidates have very high unfavorables. I don't know if it's ever been anything like that.
I mean, this is the most negative election. Once again, I always have to say modern American history. This is the most negative election since the age of television and since they started taking polls back in the 1930s. But I want to add one more point. There are more Republicans who are considering voting Democrat than we've had. There are more Democrats who are considering voting Republican. And the reason why is that the strength of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders did not come from traditional Republicans and Democrats. It came from independents. And they represent about 40% of the American electorate. And those independents wanted to send a message to both Washington and Wall Street that you are both broken. This is not an election of an endorsement of either of the two likely nominees, Trump or Clinton. It is a rejection of the system. And even though Hillary Clinton would represent the first female president, Bernie Sanders, who really is, he's not in the mainstream of American politics, and he did incredibly well. And Donald Trump is not in the mainstream of anything, and he did incredibly well. As a voice for the public who is saying in 3 words, enough is enough. And the consequence of this is the mainstream of America does not understand why their politics has sunk to this level. And I'll say to you as foreign observers, we don't understand it just like you don't. Wherever I go, I've done a number of trips across the globe in the last 3-4 months. And if they hear me speaking English, people will come up to me and ask me to interpret the American elections. And it's almost impossible to do. And I don't do it as someone who is hostile to America. I'm not Michael Moore. I do not believe in going to a foreign country and condemning my country in that place. The problem is, it's really hard to explain it when you know the negativity and the fear that Americans have. I will tell you that this is the first generation who believes that America will not be the strongest global power in the next 50 years. This is the first generation who does not believe their kids will have a better quality of life than they do. And this is the first generation who believes that the American economy will be worse and the American security will be worse 10 years from now than it is today. That's how negative America has become.
And let me say one thing. I don't know how much time we have. Where's David? Is over there talking to somebody. David, how much time do we have?
How much time do you want?
You know, my first vote was for Dwight Eisenhower. When I hit 21 years old, you had to be 21 back in my day. And so there have been a lot of presidents in the intervening period. And the reality is that notwithstanding the data that Frank is expert on, the reality is that over these many, many decades of my life, in general, the position of the United States outside the world has been, as we say in football, between the 40-yard lines. It hasn't been all the way to either end zone to the left or all the way to the right. It's been basically either party. I mean, if you think of the Cold War, we've had successive presidents of both political parties, and our country has had a rather steady state. Down the middle, in a direction. I mean, sure, it goes a little bit this way or a little bit that way, but the American people are basically serious people, and they're generally not terribly pretty well informed, and as a result of that, they see things running amok, and they get up and push that pendulum back where it belongs. And it strikes me that it would be a mistake to go away from this and think that there's going to be some sort of a sudden veering of the United States charging off in some goofy direction. I just don't see that happening. To be sure, I'm from the Midwest, and I'm congenitally optimistic, and I admit that. But I've got a lot of miles on me, and I can tell you that this country is not going to go off the road into the ditch. I just, believe me. And when we come back in a year or 2 or 3 and have our CAMCA, by then a protected domain name, one would think, and have our meeting, I'll bet you anything what I've said proves to be more correct.
We're going to do 4 more questions. And this is now why it is an advantage to give me a hard time. Go ahead.
I'm Anar from Azerbaijan. So we're talking about power and projection of American power in the world. And we all know that power corrupts. And we also know that power, absolute power, corrupts absolutely. So I guess the question is, how do you resist a temptation of not projecting a power like Russia projects, like invading other countries and infringing their territorial integrity and respecting international law? So how the United States could balance this while being a superpower and respect the world order?
It seems to me that the word power is not inappropriate, but the word influence is every bit as relevant, because even the United States doesn't gain what it gains by force or power. It gains it through influence and having the capacity to use power in the event it's appropriate. I guess the answer is, in a democracy and in a free press as we have in our country, there are all kinds of checks and balances. Almost anything the United States ever does, it has to do with other countries. And to gain other countries, you have to go to NATO, or you have to go to the UN, and you have to be persuasive, and you can be wrong, but generally you're going to have to gather a group of like-thinking nations to do something. So I think that I think that there's a danger in a country like Russia where people say, well, Putin's very popular. I don't know that. My guess is people would be a little reluctant to answer some pollster on the street or on the telephone, are you pro or negative on Putin? And I think people would probably feel they would prefer not to answer if they're negative. And the other thing is, I don't know how honest those polls are in Russia. To be sure, his approval rating is very high, much higher than Obama's. But I don't give a lot of credence to it, and I'm not a pollster, so I don't know. But I don't know what you think about the polls in Russia, but it's hard for me to believe they're that accurate.
The way that they do it there is they have people fill it out blindly, and they put it in a box. So you go place to place, and they'll be given a written survey, and they will write it down and then drop it in a box. The problem is even that isn't trusted because people don't know what's in the box, so they're afraid that they can get caught. The level of, in America it's anger, in Russia it is total fear. So I would not trust those surveys. 3 more, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I'm George Tedishvili. I teach at the University of Political Science here in Georgia. Well, my beginning of the question will be a little bit optimistic. Suppose the lesser evil, as it was rightfully mentioned before, wins despite her major deficiencies and checkered record. My question is how to avoid in the future the emergence of the likes of Donald Trump? How to make is it about political system, about actually making it more efficient, about making the mainstream deliver better so that population is less disenfranchised and disappointed? Well, I am a little bit partial since I have been an educator for many years. Maybe United States has to invest more in education so that population becomes more resistant to demagogical pronouncements, be it on the right or on the left, being Trump and being Sanders. I myself, last month, I spent about 3 days in Massachusetts, and in most of the colleges, I spoke to the Georgian students, they all fear to admit that they're supporters of Hilton. They're being actually like hazed, they're being actually sidelined because most of the colleges support...
Wait, I can't understand you. They are afraid to say they're supporters of who?
Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton, thank you.
Or Trump for that matter, it doesn't matter. It means that, okay, in these liberal New England states, majority of the campuses support trenders, and it's so undemocratic how they try to sideline them. Maybe, as you rightfully mentioned, they haven't studied Economic 101 and they lack critical thinking, in my opinion. So how to...
I think the answer is simple. The answer is that there's a self-correction that takes place. When human beings, reasonably intelligent human beings who care reasonably about their country, make a mistake, they tend to correct it. And they penalize the person who replicates that mistake. So in life, as in economics, you get more, if you want more of something, you reward it, and you want less of it, you penalize it. And if we make a mistake in an election, I think it's very unlikely the mistake would be made twice.
As I've gotten older, I've actually become less partisan and more eager to hear points of view that are not my own. Three things you could change. Number one is if you change redistricting so that it is nonpartisan, then you will have many more districts where Republicans and Democrats will have to fight it out rather than the election being decided in a primary system. Number two, the campaign finance laws are ridiculous, that they award people who can spend millions of dollars outside the system rather than holding people accountable inside the system. I would take off all of the limits, and I would have absolute, immediate, full disclosure. So you are responsible for whoever donates to you, but you can raise as much money. We don't need these outside political groups spending.
I agree with both of those thoughts.
And the third thing, and I'm going to do it, and I will have trouble getting back up, is that I wanted the new Speaker of the House, and I'm going to actually do it for you. I wanted him to come off the podium. This is when Paul Ryan was elected. And I wanted him to come off and walk towards Nancy Pelosi. Not that you look like Nancy Pelosi. Not that you've ever had a facelift or three. But I wanted him to come over to her and stand in front of her and say that you represent 47% of America and they deserve a voice. They deserve to be heard. I lead the majority. But as Speaker, I'm Speaker of the entire House, not just the Republican Party. From today forward, if you know of our system, this is in the weeds, but it's actually important. As a Democrat in the House, you may not offer an amendment. As a Democrat in the House, you don't determine debate. As a Democrat in the House, you can't even launch legislation. You have no power whatsoever, and he knows this because he started his career in the House of Representatives. I would have come forward to her and I would have said, from today forward, you will have a voice. You will be able to offer amendments. You will be able to engage in the process so your 47% of Americans will from now on have a voice. And in return, you will act responsibly and accountably. And you will not deny legislation from being voted on. You will not slow down the political process. From today forward, we will send a message that we will work together, we will succeed together, or we will fail together, but we are one country, not two political parties. And then he would have reached his hand out to shake her hand, and hopefully she would have shook back. I believe if they had done that, the message would have been so significant and so powerful that it could have changed politics as we know it. And I'm sorry that it hasn't happened, and I think that's one of the problems in the American political system. So as someone who was very successful in the House, might that have worked?
I think it would have been a good step. There's no question but that the problem with gerrymandering is they divide those districts up so that a Republican has to worry only about a threat from the right, and a Democrat has to worry only about another Democrat threat from the left. So all the competition takes place within the party and not between the parties, which is unfortunate because you end up with more polarization that takes place in the Congress.
Two more. So you're holding up the piece of paper?
Actually, I have a microphone.
So I've lost control of my own function here.
Exactly.
But you've got to ask.
I've done my best.
But you've got to ask a very quick question so we get to one more person here.
Yeah, it's actually, I have a very short comment and a question about the presidential election in the United States. So neither Trump nor Hillary Clinton is my favorite candidate, and I think that this country is such a great country, actually the best country on earth, and deserves the better candidates than we have now. But it doesn't matter, if, for example, the people are afraid about the Trump case, if Trump will be elected, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? People are terrified about this. But I think that American institutions are so strong that he will be limited. And in this case, I feel more, reluctant. I don't feel, kind of reluctant about this. My question is, the quick question is about actually the continuation of the question of the Ambassador Badridza. If there is a crisis in the United States, and I think there is a crisis in both parties, because we have two most unlikable candidates, what do you think, what the party, either Democratic Party or Republican Party, should do in this respect? And the second question, you mentioned that Hillary Clinton will not be indicted. So this Benghazi issue and email cases is a very serious issue, and American people are very concerned about this. United States of America is based on justice, and it should not be a selective justice. Do you think that if she will not be indicted, that's going to be a selective justice? Thank you very much.
So I'll do the second part, which is about Hillary Clinton, and then will either of these candidates, are they qualified and capable to deal with the challenge and threat of ISIS, which is actually a question that They need to know your answer from this, because that's significant. It is legitimately the greatest threat right now to more people in more countries. But I'll do Hillary Clinton first. It is a problem in the US right now. I resented the fact that Barack Obama talked about the 1% of America and tried to isolate them. If a few of you know me, and you know that I work 18 or 20 hours a day, and I work 7 days a week, and it's insane, but it's what I do. And he preaches that people should resent the fact that I've been successful because of the hard work I put in. I did build I did build a company from scratch. And I don't believe that we should have a situation where those who've been successful should be punished through higher taxes, higher regulations, higher everything. There is not enough accountability in American politics. And she has gotten away. It's not just Benghazi, which is a tragedy. And it is not just emails. The Clinton Global Initiative, which started with the best of intentions, is an absolute disgrace. That's her foundation. In how they take in money, how they distribute money. It is I'm trying to come up with the worst language I can, but it's pathetic what they have done. Who they take money from, what they give money to, and how it has enriched the Clintons beyond anything imaginable. And she's not been held accountable for it. And I realize, again, as someone who is right of center, that I've spoken with such concern about Trump. My greater concern in terms of integrity is Hillary Clinton, is Bill Clinton. And the reason why I crack jokes about it, and he gets annoyed and he actually told me, don't do it. The reason why I do it is this is how I function. This is how I get through the day. Because if you actually have grown up and spent your whole life in this process, and you realize that you have failed in this process, that your career and reason for existing has turned out as badly as it has, then if you don't tell jokes about it, you cry. She will be the most unethical person ever elected president of the United States. And yet I think it is likely that she will win by 3 or 4 points. And then I have to realize that the last 40 years of my life, from when I first learned the presidents, when I learned the states, when I learned the capitals, when I learned how to speak, and all the people that I volunteered for from when I was a child, that I've had no impact and I have failed. And so I tell jokes to get through the day. But you are so right, and it is an embarrassment that I wish were fixed, but I simply don't believe it will be. So what does each of these people, how do they address ISIS? Because on January 20th, that will be the greatest threat to America.
Apparently we've got a former CIA director here, Jim Woolsey, who's going to be talking later today, and you can ask him that question. But watching what President Obama has done, where he has been fundamentally unwilling to identify what the enemy is and to characterize it, and has insisted on calling attacks that have taken place workplace violence or something is hateful instead of calling it what it is. It seems to me that either candidate is likely to do a better job dealing with the problem than the current administration. Just guessing, but maybe you can ask Jim Woolsey when he speaks today.
Okay, actually, she was supposed to have it. If you will be kind and pass the microphone to the woman next to you, and she's going to have the final question. So make it good, and hopefully it works.
Yes, thank you very much. But I was about to say that there is shortage of time, and I will ask the question privately because I don't think that we have time.
Put it nearer your mouth.
Okay.
She's going to ask the question privately, then give it back to him, and he'll have the final question.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a simple question for you, Mark. I mean, despite everything that Donald Trump called you, you're a truly exceptional and an inspirational person. I'm going to ask you the question that you have been probably asked when you were 7 or 10, that in 10, 20, 30 years, where do you want to be? What do you want to become?
You're asking me this?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'll be dead, so... okay, I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer is I actually want to be Secretary of Agriculture in a Bernie Sanders administration. Because then I get to plant the magic trees where all that free crap grows from. I'm doing it. Oh, come on, that's good. I'm where I want to be. You know, it's actually a wonderful way. What I'm doing now is what I want to be doing. So I had you don't even know this, but I had a very, very profitable speech that I canceled for this. So when they asked me, they didn't realize, they assumed I was going to say no. And of course I said yes, because it's his foundation, and because I'd met some of you. And then when I found out that we're going to actually be able to sit up together, I'm like, this is going to be awesome. And you participated a lot more than you ever said you were going. He was going to walk off after 25 minutes. So the fact that he stayed. So he's my hero. And he's my hero because he has courage that I don't understand. You need to know that on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post, on every newscast, this man's reputation was under attack day after day, month after month, for 2 or 3 years. And he withstood it. And he did what he thought and believed and studied to be right, no matter what criticism came of him. And it is unimaginable for most of you, with the exception of, and he was walking around before and I'm looking for him. Last night I got to meet someone who actually was legitimately a political refugee. And I can't see that he's here, and he may be. That is what is so special about you all. That the experience that you've had, we in America have never had before. We don't understand what it is to have your house destroyed. We don't understand what it is to not know when we come back home if our neighborhood is still going to exist. We have been an island unto ourselves until 9/11, and frankly, even with 9/11, it is nothing compared to what most of you have faced here. And so the idea that I get to ask him questions, someone who I've respected from when I was much, much younger and thinner, this is my dream come true. And I hope that you have a sense of pride when you look out to them of what you've achieved. I hope you have a sense of pride for the fact that despite that your administration was so criticized, in so many ways you made the world stronger and safer and healthier. It didn't all work out, but it never all does. But you had the courage of your convictions. You have served so many presidents with distinction. You have a business career, and most importantly for you, you have a wonderful family. And you've done all these things. And so I hope that when you see them, you realize that you have lived a good and wonderful life, and you've given me the chance to thank you for all that you've done for my country and for the global community.
Goodness, Frank. Let's hear it for Frank. Thank you for coming, and I appreciate it a great deal. You're a friend.